The dawn of a new alliance. In a galaxy far from Earth, the known universe was in turmoil. For years, an ominous shadow had spread across countless star systems, threatening to consume everything in its path. The Kargath, an ancient and warlike species, had waged a relentless campaign of conquest, leaving a trail of destruction wherever they went. No species, no planet, no star system was safe from their insatiable hunger for power. The Galactic Federation, a once powerful coalition of planets and species dedicated to peace and cooperation, found itself on the brink of collapse. Desperate, the Federation called upon every ally it could muster. Yet, despite their best efforts, the Kargath continued to gain ground, their warships darkening the skies of one world after another. Amidst this chaos, Earth remained a relative newcomer to the galactic stage. Humanity had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel and established tentative relations with other species. The humans were still largely unknown, viewed by some as a curiosity, by others as a potential threat, but by most as insignificant players in the grand cosmic game. That perception was about to change. As the Kargath fleet closed in on the Federation's core worlds, a desperate council meeting was convened on the planet Voria. Delegates from dozens of species gathered in the Great Chamber of the Federation, their holographic images flickering as they debated their next move. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with fear and uncertainty. For hours the delegates argued, their voices rising in a cacophony of despair. Some called for surrender, others for a last-ditch defense, but all knew that the situation was dire. The Kargath were too strong, too ruthless, and their victory seemed inevitable. Then, just as hope seemed lost, a new voice cut through the chaos. "We have not yet exhausted all our options." The voice belonged to Commander Elena Riker, the head of Earth's delegation. Unlike most of the other delegates, she was not a politician, but a soldier, a veteran of countless battles fought on the frontiers of human space. Her presence was commanding, her gaze steady as she looked around the chamber. "We have studied the Kargath," she continued, her voice calm but firm. "We know their strengths and weaknesses. We believe there is a way to stop them, but it will require cooperation and trust." The other delegates listened in stunned silence. For too long, humanity had been an outsider, viewed with suspicion and distrust. But now, in this moment of crisis, they had a chance to prove themselves. Commander Riker laid out her plan. It was audacious, perhaps even reckless, but it was the only chance they had. The Kargath were a formidable enemy, but they were not invincible. Their strength lay in their numbers, their overwhelming firepower, but they also had weaknesses that humanity had studied and understood. The plan called for a coordinated strike on the Kargath's central command. It would require the combined might of every remaining Federation fleet, along with Earth's own forces. It was a risky gambit, but if it succeeded, it could turn the tide of the war. There was resistance, of course. Some of the older, more established species were reluctant to place their trust in the humans, but in the end, desperation won out. The Federation had no other choice. And so the alliance was formed. Ships were mobilized, weapons prepared, and strategies devised. The humans worked tirelessly alongside their new allies, sharing their knowledge, their technology, and their determination. As the final preparations were made, Commander Riker stood on the bridge of the human flagship, the USS Resolute. She looked out at the vast fleet assembled before her, ships of all shapes and sizes, from 100 different worlds, all united in a common cause. It was a sight she would never forget, a testament to what could be achieved when species put aside their differences and worked together. "All ships, prepare for warp," she ordered, her voice echoing across the fleet. "It's time to show the Kargath what we're made of." With a flash of light, the fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading straight for the heart of the Kargath Empire. The battle that awaited them would be one of the fiercest in galactic history, but for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of hope. The war was far from over, But the tide was about to turn. The battle for the stars. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace, they were immediately met with the full force of the Kargath Armada. The enemy ships were massive, bristling with weapons and shields, their dark hulls absorbing the light of the nearby stars. It was a sight to strike fear into the heart of any seasoned warrior. But Commander Riker and her allies were prepared. They had spent weeks studying the Kargath's tactics, their formations, their strengths, and their weaknesses. They knew that a direct assault would be suicide, so they had devised a plan to outmaneuver the enemy, to exploit the one weakness that the Kargath had overlooked: overconfidence. All ships execute Maneuver Delta, Riker commanded, her voice calm but resolute. The Federation fleet split into two groups, the first engaging the Kargath head-on, drawing their fire, while the second looped around, targeting the enemy's flanks. It was a risky maneuver, one that required precise timing and coordination, but it was their best shot. The battle erupted into a chaotic frenzy of laser fire, missile volleys, and explosions. Ships from both sides were destroyed in the opening salvos, their debris scattering across the battlefield. The Federation's forces were outnumbered, outgunned, but they fought with a tenacity that surprised even their own commanders. Commander Riker directed the battle from the bridge of the U.S. Resolute, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. She could see the patterns forming, the weaknesses in the Kargath's lines, and she adjusted her orders accordingly. It was like a deadly game of chess, with thousands of lives hanging in the balance. Now, Riker shouted, and the second group of Federation ships made their move, striking at the Kargath's exposed flanks with a ferocity that caught the enemy off guard. The Kargath fleet wavered, their formations breaking apart as they scrambled to respond. It was the opening the Federation needed. With a single decisive push, they drove into the heart of the Kargath Armada, their ships weaving through the enemy lines with deadly precision. But the Kargath were not so easily defeated. Their flagship, a colossal dreadnought that dwarfed even the largest Federation vessels, unleashed a barrage of firepower that tore through the Federation's ranks. Riker watched in horror as ship after ship was destroyed, their crews lost in an instant. "We need to take out that dreadnought," Riker said, her voice grim. "All remaining ships, focus your fire on the Kargath flagship. We take it down, or we die trying." The USS Resolute led the charge, its weapons blazing as it closed in on the enemy flagship. The Kargath responded in kind, their dreadnought's shields flaring as they absorbed the incoming fire. It was a brutal, head-to-head confrontation, with neither side willing to give an inch. The battle raged on, each side trading devastating blows. The Federation ships fought with everything they had, but they were slowly being worn down, their numbers dwindling with each passing minute. The Kargath dreadnought seemed invincible, its shields holding strong despite the relentless assault. But Riker refused to give up. She knew that victory was within their grasp if they could just find a way to break through. She scanned the tactical display, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability that they could exploit. Then she saw it, a small, unprotected section of the dreadnought's hull just below the main weapons array. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. "Target that section," Riker ordered. "All ships, concentrate your fire on my mark." The Federation fleet rallied for one final assault. They poured every ounce of energy they had into their weapons, focusing their fire on the vulnerable section of the dreadnought's hull. The enemy ship's shields buckled under the pressure, and then finally they gave way. With a deafening explosion, the Kargath flagship was destroyed, its massive bulk breaking apart in a shower of debris. The remaining Kargath ships, leaderless and disoriented, began to retreat, their morale shattered. The battle was over. The Federation had won. But the cost had been high. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of countless ships, both Federation and Kargath. Thousands of lives had been lost, and the war was far from over. But for the first time in years, there was hope. Commander Riker looked out at the debris-strewn space, her heart heavy with the weight of what had been sacrificed. But she knew that this victory, however costly, was just the beginning. The Kargath had been dealt a significant blow, but they were still a formidable enemy. The war would continue, but now the Federation had a chance to fight back, to reclaim their worlds, and to forge a new future. The aftermath. The battle may have been won, but the scars it left behind were deep. As the Federation fleet regrouped and began the somber task of recovering the survivors and the fallen, the true cost of the victory became painfully clear. The US of Resolute had sustained heavy damage during the battle, its once pristine hull now marred by scorch marks and gaping holes. On the bridge, Commander Riker and her crew worked tirelessly to stabilize the ship's systems, their faces etched with exhaustion. "Damage report," Riker ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Shields are down to 20%, weapon systems are offline, and we've lost main power to the engines," replied Lieutenant Davis, the ship's chief engineer. "We're holding together, but just barely." "Casualties?" Riker asked, though she already knew the answer would be grim. "Heavy," Davis said quietly. "We lost a lot of good people." Riker nodded, her expression unreadable. She had seen death before, on countless battlefields across the galaxy, but it never got easier. Each life lost was a weight on her conscience, a reminder of the price of war. "Begin search and rescue operations," she ordered. "We need to get our people back." As the Resolute and the other surviving ships began combing the battlefield for escape pods and life signs, Riker allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Kargath had been defeated here, but the war was far from over. There would be more battles to fight, more lives to lose. But for now, they had won a victory, one that could turn the tide of the entire war. On the surface of Voria, the Galactic Federation Council was already convening to discuss the next steps. The victory had given them a renewed sense of purpose, but it had also raised new challenges. The Federation was still fractured, its members divided by fear and distrust. The Kargath threat had forced them to unite, but that unity was fragile. Riker knew that the real battle was just beginning, the battle to rebuild, to strengthen the alliance, and to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. The Kargath would not take this defeat lightly. They would regroup, they would strike back, and the Federation needed to be ready. As she stood on the bridge, looking out at the wreckage of the battle, Riker felt a renewed sense of determination. She had fought to protect her people, to give them a future, and she would continue to fight until the Kargath were defeated once and for all. The Council's dilemma. The US as Resolute limped back to Voria, its crew battered but resolute. As they neared the planet, the enormity of the battle they had just fought weighed heavily on everyone's minds. But there was little time for reflection. The victory, though significant, was just a small reprieve in a much larger and more complex war. On Voria, the Galactic Federation's council chamber was a hive of activity. Delegates from every corner of the Federation were in attendance, either in person or through holographic projection. The room buzzed with tension and urgency. News of the victory had spread quickly, but so had the news of the heavy losses. The councillors knew that the Federation was at a crossroads. As Commander Riker entered the chamber, flanked by her senior officers, she could feel the weight of their stares. Some looked at her with admiration, others with skepticism, but all were united in their need for answers. The council president, a venerable Vorian named Eldar Thane, stood at the center of the chamber, his deep blue skin glistening under the lights. He raised a hand for silence, and the room quickly fell quiet. "Commander Riker," he began, his voice calm but authoritative, "you and your forces have struck a major blow against the Kargath. For that, you have the gratitude of this council. But our victory today has come at a great cost. We have lost many ships and many lives. The Kargath may be wounded, but they are far from defeated. We must decide our next course of action." Riker stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. "President Thane, councillors, I won't sugarcoat our situation. The Kargath remain a formidable enemy, and they will undoubtedly retaliate. But we've shown that they can be beaten. What we need now is to build on this momentum. We need to reinforce our alliances, rebuild our fleets, and strike the Kargath before they have a chance to recover. Rebuild our fleets? Interrupted a councillor from the Andorian Republic, her tone skeptical. We've lost a significant portion of our forces in this battle. It could take years to recover, and by then, the Kargath will have overwhelmed us. The US Resolute turned away from the battlefield, its engines sputtering to life as it began the journey back to the Federation's heart. There, among the stars, a new chapter in the war would begin, one that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Riker nodded, understanding the concern. I agree that our losses are severe, but we can't afford to wait. We need to call upon every resource, every ally, and every planet within the Federation to contribute to the war effort. This isn't just about rebuilding what we lost. It's about creating something stronger, something that can withstand the Kargath's next assault. Another councillor, this one from the Lysian Empire, spoke up. And what of those who are not yet fully committed to our cause? There are still worlds within the Federation that remain neutral or are hesitant to engage fully. If we push too hard, we risk fracturing the Federation from within. Riker paused, choosing her next words carefully. I understand your concern, but the time for neutrality has passed. The Kargath don't care about our internal divisions. They will conquer and destroy us all, regardless of our differences. We must show those hesitant worlds that the only way to survive is to stand together. If we don't, we risk losing everything. The chamber erupted into a heated debate, with councillors arguing both for and against Riker's proposals. Some supported her call to action, while others were more cautious, fearing the long-term consequences of overextending their resources. Eldar Thane allowed the debate to continue for a while before raising his hand once more to restore order. Enough, he said, his voice firm. Commander Riker has given us much to consider. We must remember that we are not just fighting for survival, we are fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. The Kargath are relentless, and they will not stop until we are all under their control or annihilated. We must be just as relentless in our determination to stop them. Set course for Voria, she ordered. We have work to do. He turned to Riker. Commander, you have the Council's support in your efforts to rebuild our forces, but we must proceed with caution and ensure that we do not overextend ourselves. The Federation is a fragile alliance, and we must work to strengthen it from within, even as we prepare for the battles ahead. Riker nodded. Understood, President Thane. I will do everything in my power to ensure that we are ready for whatever comes next. The Council adjourned, but the sense of urgency remained. As Riker and her officers left the chamber, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she knew that the Federation had the potential to rise to the challenge if they could only find the strength to stand united. A new plan. Back aboard the US Resolute, Riker gathered her senior staff in the ship's war room. They needed to come up with a strategy, one that would allow them to rebuild quickly and strike back against the Kargath before they could fully recover. Commander, began Lieutenant Davis, the ship's chief engineer, we're not going to be able to repair the Resolute on our own. She's taken too much damage. We're going to need to dock at a shipyard, and even then, it'll be weeks before she's battle-ready again. Agreed, Riker said, looking at the holographic display of the ship's status. But we don't have weeks. We need to start planning our next move now, even if that means fighting with what we have. Lieutenant Commander Zara, the ship's tactical officer, leaned forward. What about guerrilla tactics? We know the Kargath rely on their size and firepower, but that makes them slow. If we can hit their supply lines, sabotage their communications, and disrupt their command structure, we can weaken them without engaging them in full-scale battles. Riker considered the suggestion. It was risky, but it had merit. The Kargath were not invincible. They had weaknesses that could be exploited. Guerrilla tactics would allow them to keep the enemy off balance, buying time to rebuild their fleets and strengthen their alliances. I like it, Riker said. We'll need to coordinate with our allies, identify key targets, and strike hard and fast. We can't leave the Kargath a chance to regroup. But what about the fleet? Asked Dr. Ilara, the ship's medical officer. We've lost so many ships, and the crew's exhausted. They need time to recover, physically and mentally. Riker nodded, acknowledging the concern. You're right, Doctor. Our people are stretched thin, and they've been through a lot. We'll give them what rest we can, but we can't afford to stand down completely. We'll rotate our crews, keep them fresh, and support them however we can. But the war doesn't stop, and neither can we. The meeting continued late into the night, with Riker and her officers refining their strategy. They knew that the next phase of the war would be even more challenging than the last, but they were determined to fight for every inch of space, every life, every chance at victory. By the time they were done, the plan was set. The Federation would adopt a two-pronged approach: guerrilla tactics to disrupt the Kargath's operations, combined with a massive rebuilding effort to prepare for the inevitable full-scale confrontation. It was a bold strategy, but it was their best shot at turning the tide of the war for good. As the officers dispersed, Riker remained in the war room, staring at the star map. The weight of command pressed heavily on her, but she knew she couldn't let it crush her. She had a duty to her crew, to the Federation, to every world that was counting on her to find a way to stop the Kargath. We'll win this, she whispered to herself, clenching her fist. We have to. And with that, she turned away from the map and headed to her quarters, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. Striking from the shadows, the U.S. Resolute docked at the Zeta Prime shipyard, a vast orbital facility floating above a lush green planet. This was one of the few remaining shipyards capable of servicing the Federation's larger vessels, and it was a critical asset in the war against the Kargath. As soon as the Resolute was secured, engineers and technicians swarmed over the ship, assessing damage and beginning repairs. Commander Riker watched the activity from a viewport in the shipyard's command center. The damage to the Resolute was severe, but the engineers were confident they could get the ship battle-ready in a fraction of the usual time. Still, Riker knew that every hour spent in the shipyard was time the Kargath could use to regroup and launch another assault. She turned to Lieutenant Commander Zara, who was standing beside her. We need to get our guerrilla operations up and running as soon as possible. Have you identified potential targets? Zara nodded, bringing up a holographic display of the nearby star systems. We've located several key supply routes the Kargath are using to reinforce their front lines. If we can disrupt these, it'll slow their advance and buy us more time to rebuild. I've also identified a few communication relays and command outposts that we could hit to further destabilize their operations. Riker studied the map, considering the options. We'll need to move quickly and quietly. The Kargath are likely on high alert after our last encounter. We can't afford to engage them directly. Our focus should be on hit-and-run tactics. Minimal engagement, maximum disruption. Zara tapped a few commands, highlighting a particularly vulnerable supply route. This convoy route through the Marin Nebula is lightly defended, but it's critical to their war effort. If we can take out a few key transports, it'll create a ripple effect, causing delays and shortages across their front lines. Riker smiled grimly. Sounds like the perfect place to start. Assemble a strike team and get our best pilots ready. We'll hit them hard and fast, and then vanish before they know what hit them. Within hours, the Resolute had deployed several smaller, stealth-capable vessels. These ships, each manned by elite crews, were the spearhead of Riker's guerrilla strategy. Their mission was clear: strike the Kargath where it hurt the most and leave chaos in their wake. The first target was the convoy in the Marin Nebula. The nebula's dense clouds of ionized gas provided excellent cover for the Federation's ships, allowing them to approach the Kargath convoy undetected. As the enemy transports moved slowly through the swirling mists, the Federation ships pounced. Plasma torpedoes streaked through the nebula, striking the Kargath transports with deadly precision. Explosions blossomed in the darkness, lighting up the nebula like distant stars. The Kargath escorts, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, but the Federation ships were already pulling back, disappearing into the swirling gas clouds as quickly as they had appeared. It was a textbook hit-and-run operation, executed with flawless precision. The Kargath convoy was left in disarray, with several transports destroyed and others crippled. Supplies critical to the Kargath's war effort were either lost or delayed, exactly as Riker had planned. But the Federation's strike teams didn't stop there. Over the next few days, they launched a series of similar raids, targeting Kargath supply lines, communication relays, and even a few isolated outposts. Each strike was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimal risk, and each one was a success. Back on Zeta Prime, Riker monitored the progress of the guerrilla operations closely. Reports came in from across the sector, detailing the confusion and chaos spreading through the Kargath ranks. Their supply lines were in shambles, their communications were unreliable, and their forces were becoming increasingly disorganized. But Riker knew that these victories, while important, were only temporary. The Kargath would eventually adapt, and when they did, they would come back stronger and more determined than ever. The Federation needed to be ready for that day. As the repairs on the Resolute continued, Riker also focused on rebuilding the Federation's fleet. She reached out to allied worlds, calling in every favor, every resource, and every ship they could spare. The response was overwhelming. Ships from across the Federation began arriving at Zeta Prime, each one a testament to the resilience and determination of the Federation's member worlds. Among the new arrivals was the US Valkyrie, a state-of-the-art battleship designed specifically for the war against the Kargath. The Valkyrie was larger and more heavily armed than the Resolute, and it was equipped with the latest in defensive technology. It was a ship built for one purpose: to take the fight to the enemy. As Riker stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The Federation was battered, but it was far from broken. They had the ships, the crews, and the resolve to fight back. All they needed now was the right plan. "Commander," said Lieutenant Davis, who had transferred to the Valkyrie to oversee its engineering team, "the ship is fully operational. We're ready to deploy at your command." Riker nodded. "Good. We're not just going to defend ourselves. We're going to take the fight to the Kargath. It's time they realized that the Federation won't be pushed around." With the Valkyrie leading the charge, Riker planned a series of coordinated strikes deep into Kargath territory. These would be high-risk operations, aimed at crippling the Kargath's ability to wage war. But Riker knew that it was the only way to truly turn the tide. As the Valkyrie and its fleet prepared to depart, Riker addressed her crew. "This is it, people. We're going into the heart of enemy territory. We're going to hit them where it hurts, and we're going to make sure they never forget the name of the Federation. Stay sharp, stay focused, and we'll come out of this stronger than ever. Let's show the Kargath what we're made of." With that, the fleet jumped to warp, heading straight for the Kargath's most critical installations. The Federation was no longer just defending its borders, it was on the offensive, and it wouldn't stop until the Kargath threat was eliminated for good. The final stand. The Federation fleet emerged from warp at the edge of the Kargath home system, a sprawling collection of planets orbiting a massive red star. This was the heart of the Kargath Empire, the source of their power and the seat of their leadership. It was also heavily fortified, with countless warships, defense platforms, and planetary shields protecting it. Riker knew that this would be the Federation's toughest battle yet. The Kargath had been caught off guard by the guerrilla strikes, but they were ready now. The element of surprise was gone, and the Federation fleet was outnumbered and outgunned. But Riker also knew that they had no choice. If they didn't strike now, the Kargath would rebuild and come back stronger than ever. "All ships, this is Commander Riker," she said over the fleet's communication channel. "We've come a long way to get here, and we've faced impossible odds every step of the way. But we're not done yet. This is the final push. We take out their command center, and we end this war. Stay sharp, stay together, and fight like you've never fought before, for the Federation. With that, the fleet surged forward, heading straight for the Kargath defenses. The battle began almost immediately, with waves of Kargath fighters and warships meeting the Federation's advance. The Valkyrie led the charge, its powerful weapons carving a path through the enemy lines. The fighting was intense, with both sides taking heavy losses. The Kargath warships were relentless, but the Federation fleet fought with a determination born of desperation. They knew that this was their last chance to stop the Kargath once and for all. As the battle raged on, Riker received a transmission from the Resolute, which was still undergoing repairs at Zeta Prime. "Commander, we've just received intel from our scouts. The Kargath are preparing a massive counterattack. They're planning to overwhelm us with sheer numbers." Riker's mind raced. The Kargath's plan was clear. They would throw everything they had at the Federation fleet, hoping to crush them through sheer force. It was a brutal but effective strategy. But Riker wasn't about to let that happen. "Relay this to all ships. We're going to change tactics. Focus all fire on their command ship. If we can take out their leadership, the rest of their fleet will be in disarray. It's our only chance." The order was given, and the Federation fleet shifted its focus. The Kargath command ship, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons, was at the center of the enemy formation. It was heavily defended, but Riker knew that if they could destroy it, the Kargath fleet would fall apart. The Valkyrie led the assault, its cannons unleashing a torrent of fire at the command ship. The other Federation ships followed suit, concentrating their fire on the dreadnought's shields. The Kargath warships swarmed to protect their leader, but the Federation fleet pressed on, determined to break through. Explosions rocked the command ship as its shields began to falter. The Kargath dreadnought fought back with everything it had, but the concentrated fire from the Federation fleet was too much. Finally, with a massive explosion, the command ship's shields collapsed, and the dreadnought was torn apart by a barrage of torpedoes. As the Kargath command ship disintegrated, the enemy fleet began to fall into disarray. Without their leader, the Kargath warships lost coordination, and the Federation fleet began to gain the upper hand. One by one, the enemy ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. The battle was fierce, but the tide had turned. With their command ship destroyed and their fleet in disarray, the Kargath forces began to withdraw. The Federation fleet pursued them, mopping up the remaining resistance and securing their victory. When the last of the Kargath warships had fled or been destroyed, a cheer went up through the Federation fleet. The battle had been won, and with it the war. The Kargath Empire, once the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known, was in ruins. Riker stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, watching the wreckage of the Kargath fleet drift through space. The cost had been high, but the Federation had prevailed. They had fought for every inch of space, for every life, and they had emerged victorious. As the fleet regrouped and prepared to return to Federation space, Riker allowed herself a moment of relief. The war was over. The galaxy was safe. But she knew that the peace they had won was fragile, and that the Federation would need to remain vigilant to protect it. For now, though, she would savor the victory. The Federation had faced its darkest hour, and it had emerged stronger than ever. And Riker knew that as long as they stood together, they could face any challenge that came their way.